Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here for UFC 271, which sees a middleweight championship fight rematch between Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker. But just very quickly, before we jump into the breakdowns, in case you missed it yesterday at MMA Play 365, we're excited to announce that we've launched our brand new UFC prediction software called Base AI. That software is going to be predicting every single UFC fight. Percentage predictions, it's going to tell you the percentage of the fighter that's going to win, the fighter that's going to lose. We've got methods of victory in there as well, so fighter to win by knockout, submission or decision. And we've also got methods of victory plus the rounds as well. So for example, fighter A to win in round one via knockout. Make sure you check that out. Go to our website, which is MMAplay365.com. Now straight into the breakdowns. In that middleweight championship fight, we've got Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker. Now, the last time that this fight happened, it was Robert Whittaker that was the champion. Israel Adesanya, that was the challenger. And I bet Israel Adesanya in that fight. He was plus money. It was an easy cash. He looked phenomenal. I've been an Israel Adesanya fan for a while now. I think he's a solid, world-class, elite striker. But there's something in this fight that just doesn't sit right with me. So when Robert Whittaker lost last time out, I still think Whittaker's the same fighter now as what he was back then. But Whittaker was very vocal after that fight that he didn't like the pressure of being a champion. He was battling some demons from a mental perspective as well. You know, we don't need to go too much into that, but he had a lot of issues from a mental perspective going into that fight, and I definitely think it showed. He went in there, he tried to sprint rather than fight a marathon like he normally fights. This time I think it's going to be a little bit different. He's motivated, he's battled those demons, he's in a completely different place, and he's still the same fighter. Now the way I see this is, yes, Israel Adesanya is an elite striker. He's going to be hitting to the legs, to the body, to the head with his kicks, and his movement is really elusive and he's really fast, but I definitely think Robert Whittaker's been disrespected on the betting line, being more than a 2-1 underdog in this fight. And I think that Robert Whittaker could replicate a very similar game plan and fight in a very similar way to what Kelvin Gastelum fought against Israel Adesanya. Now that's probably the last real elite version of Kelvin Gastelum we saw, but Robert Whittaker is at that level, if not better. So if Whittaker can make this fight close, if he can get past the early couple of rounds where Adesanya is going to be really fresh, really fast, really elusive, I think that Whittaker's all-round game is good enough to give Israel Adesanya a really good fight here. And if he's on his game, I think Robert Whittaker can still beat anybody in the world. I think Whittaker's a world-class fighter wherever the fight goes. Israel Adesanya obviously is good wherever the fight goes, but he's more of an elite striker rather than an elite wrestler or grappler. So I think from an all-round perspective, Robert Whittaker is the better fighter. I do think that Israel Adesanya is by far the better striker though, so this is what I mean. Whittaker's got to mix things up inside the cage if he's going to get the win, and I think he can do that. And it actually really pains me to say this, but I'm picking Robert Whittaker to win this fight. I think that he's got the tools that he needs, and I think he's in the right place mentally to be able to beat Israel Adesanya. So I'm picking Robert Whittaker to win the fight and become the new UFC middleweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got in the co-main event, Derrick Lewis versus Tai Tuivasa. Now, just before I get into the breakdowns here, whoever wins and whoever loses, if these two guys are not interviewed together at the end of the fight, I think that the UFC have missed a massive trick here, because Derrick Lewis is hilarious comedy gold on the mic, and Tai Tuivasa, Mr. Shuey, is also absolutely hilarious. They just need to interview these two guys in the center of the cage together after the fight. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal viewing for sure. Like I said, comedy gold. But back to the fight, someone's getting knocked out here. I don't think there's any two ways about it. I think Tai Tuivasa is the quicker striker, the more dynamic striker, the fighter that's going to mix things up a little bit more in between your legs, your leg kicks, your knees, kicks to the body. And like I said, he's got real solid power in his hands as well. And then over on the flip side with Derrick Lewis, yes, you're not going to get the movement from Derrick Lewis. Yes, you're not going to get the kicking game from Derrick Lewis, but that punching power, just look what he did to Chris Daukaus last time out. Daukaus was lighting those leg kicks up early in the fight. Derrick Lewis was biding his time. And as soon as it was time to go, connect, land on Daukaus, he did that, hurt Daukaus, who has been durable to that point. And Derrick Lewis just put it on him, knocked him out. Now, what's really concerning from this point of view is with Tai Tuivasa, you go back to the Greg Hardy fight, Greg Hardy and Tai Tuivasa had that little bit of an exchange in the centre of the cage, and Tuivasa was hurt, he was wobbled a bit. Greg Hardy came forward recklessly, and then it was actually Tuivasa that slept Hardy. But if this is the other way around, if that's Derrick Lewis and not Greg Hardy in there, I think Tai Tuivasa goes to sleep. And I constantly pick against Derrick Lewis because of, you know, his movement speed and the fact that he's just waiting for that one big punch. But Tai Tuivasa is going to be absolutely game in this fight. Tuivasa ain't about stepping out of range, fighting at range and biding his time. Tuivasa likes to get in there and he likes to scrap. I think he's going to do that with Derrick Lewis, and I think Derrick Lewis naturally is going to land something and he's going to knock him out. So I'm picking Derrick Lewis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jared Cannonier versus Derek Brunson. You've got to hand it to Derek Brunson at one point. I think a lot of people, including myself, thought he was down and out, but then he's moved over to train with Henry Hoof at Sanford MMA and originally Hard Knocks 365. But Derek Brunson has been on a tear since then, and I think one of the main reasons why is he's gone back to his wrestling roots. He was trying to knock people out for a long time, fell in love with that knockout, and the older he's got, you know, because he is getting on a little bit, I'm not saying he's declining, but, you know, he's definitely closer to the end of his career than the beginning of his career. And he was getting knocked out himself just because he was leaving himself open, looking for wild punches. So going back to the wrestling has been really smart for Derek Brunson. But I feel like he's fought a lot of fighters that have got very questionable takedown defense, that can get taken down. Then when they do get taken down, they've got a questionable get-up game as well. So fighters like Kevin Holland and Darren Till, I like both of those fighters, but from a defensive wrestling and a defensive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu perspective, they can be got at. Whereas with Jared Cannonier, he's proven outside of obviously his heavyweight fights and his light heavyweight fights, when he's come back down to middleweight, and he looks big, he looks strong, and he has become a defensive wrestling machine. You know, fighters have tried to take him down, and sure, Jack Manson got him down. A couple of fighters have got him down, but only momentarily. He's got a good get-up game. He's very strong. He's difficult to take down. And I think this is going to be a problem for Brunson. I do expect Brunson to take him down once or twice, but Jared Cannonier just pops right back up to his feet after he's made his opponent work really hard and expend a lot of energy trying to take him down. And stylistically, like I said, I think that's going to cause problems for Derek Brunson, even though Brunson is on a bit of a tear right now. He is on a resurgence, and credit to him, but at some point that's going to come to an end when he reaches a certain level of competition. I think Jared Cannonier's defensive aspects from the wrestling and grappling perspective are going to serve him well here. He's going to be able to keep the fight on the feet for the majority of the fight. And I just don't see Brunson being able to handle the power that Cannonier can land, whether it be the low kicks, the switch stance low kicks, then the power that he's got in his hands as well. The dude dropped Gastelum hard. Gastelum's a notoriously tough fighter, difficult to drop. And like I said, Cannonier's got raw power in his hands. He's quick and he's very patient. And like I said, that switch stance causes a lot of problems as well, especially from Brunson as a wrestler that's going to be trying to get the reads in for the entries on the takedowns. I think Cannonier switching stances is going to throw him a little bit as well. I think it's a difficult fight for Brunson stylistically, and then the power that Jared Cannonier possesses as well, I think ultimately is going to be the final nail in the coffin in this fight for Derek Brunson. I'm picking Jared Cannonier to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kyler Phillips versus Marcelo Rojo. And again, this is going to be a really good fight. It's going to be wild from start to finish. Kyler Phillips comes out, starts fast, in the face of his opponent, good movement, in and out of range. And Kyler Phillips is one of the fighters that I do think has got a really high ceiling. Sure, he had a bit of a setback last time out against Raulian Paiva, but what he's going to learn from, what he will have learned from that fight, you know, is something that he can take with him in future fights. But Kyler Phillips is so talented, whether it be his striking, elusive, creative, dynamic striking, or whether that be his wrestling and grappling. Is a legit BJJ black belt, and on the feet he's got that karate style. He's got good hands, good combinations with the boxing. Then he mixes in kicks really well as well. I like Marcelo Rojo as a fighter. I think he's a good, exciting fighter that I think everybody should be excited when he's on a card and stepping inside the cage. But I'm really struggling to see where Marcelo Rojo really does beat Kyler Phillips outside of, you know, just landing a hard punch and knocking him out, which, you know, it's always possible in MMA, 4-ounce gloves, especially at this level at the UFC. Everybody's a decent fighter, but I think Kyler Phillips does him for speed. I think he does him for movement. I think he does him from a kickboxing perspective. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he's the better grappler. There's a reason Kyler Phillips is a -400 favourite in this fight. I'm picking Kyler Phillips to win this fight. Then in the next fight, we've got Nasrat Haqparast versus Bobby Green. Now, Haqparast, I think, just bit off more than he could chew against Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker controlled him in the fight from a striking perspective and even from a wrestling and grappling perspective as well. I think a lot of people were surprised that Hooker had that wrestling game plan against him, and it worked, and it did show some holes in Haqparast's takedown game. Now, for Bobby Green's a good wrestler. We don't see it all too often because he likes to excite, he likes to talk and, you know, trash talk his opponent inside the cage, and he's got really awkward movement. He does like to box, but Bobby Green has got a good wrestling game. If Bobby Green's game plan in this fight is to take Nasrat Haqparast down, I don't necessarily think he's going to be overly successful, but I do think he will have success. And I do think from all paths to victory, that's probably Bobby Green's best path to victory. And that's not to say he's a bad striker. He is efficient as a striker. We saw him against Rafael Fiziev. He had a good fight with Fiziev, a fight where, you know, a few people thought that Bobby Green might have won that fight. But this is a little bit different against Haqparast. Fights in a southpaw stance. He's got solid power in his hands. He's got good combinations. He'll throw kicks. And actually, Haqparast's defensive wrestling outside of that Dan Hooker fight has looked really good. So even if Bobby Green does shoot a couple of takedowns, I'm not saying he can't take him down, but I think it's going to be difficult. I think the fight is going to be played out on the feet for the most part. And Bobby Green's going to be able to be hit by Haqparast. The only thing that's a little bit concerning from Haqparast's perspective is he can be a little bit of a slow starter, but that's normally just because he's downloading information on his fighter, making reads, trying to figure out where he's going to have success. And then once he gets going, like I say, those combinations come out fast, they come out hard. And I do think he's going to cause Bobby Green problems the longer the fight goes on. I think it's going to be a really, really close fight. I'm surprised that the betting line is as wide as what it is. I mean, it's not crazy, but Haqparast at plus 150, I definitely think it should be shorter. I think Haqparast, his speed, his movement, like I said, the longer the fight goes on, is going to be enough to make him efficient in this fight. If he doesn't find the knockout, then I can see Nasrat Haqparast winning 2 out of 3 rounds. I'm picking Nasrat Haqparast to win this fight. Then in the next fight, we've got Andrei Arlovski versus Jared Vanderaa. Again, it's one of those fights that I think is going to be really slow paced. I think it's probably going to go to a decision. I don't see any fighter that in here that's really going to knock the other fighter out, even though they're both heavyweights. They tend to both prefer a point fighting style opposed to landing one big bomb that's going to knock their opponent out. What is concerning from Arlovski's perspective is last time out against Carlos Felipe, he did tire late in the fight and allowed Felipe to come forward after Felipe didn't really do too much in those opening couple of rounds. So from Jared Vandera's perspective, one thing he does have is good cardio with that point fighting style, and he will keep active throughout the fight. So I think Jared Vanderaa is going to have moments in this fight where he could potentially steal around, and if he gets Arlovski tired like Arlovski was last time, then he could end up winning the fight via either a late stoppage or just by taking over the longer the fight goes on. But I do think from an experience and a technical perspective, Arlovski is the better fighter in this fight. So although there are a couple of concerns from Arlovski's perspective, which you are going to get with an older fighter, I do think that Arlovski's experience and his technical ability, along with just weirdly just being able to win these close, gritty, ugly fights, even when we think that Arlovski's lost a fight on a decision, he'll end up winning a split decision. He's just that type of fighter that can just slow everything down, fight at his pace, and it just allows him to just gain those slight edges over the 3 rounds. I think the same thing happens here. I'm picking Andrei Arlovski to win this fight. Then in the next fight, we've got Roxanne Modafferi versus King Casey O'Neill. Casey O'Neill, real solid prospect. Obviously, the hardcore MMA fans know everything about Casey O'Neill at this point. She's got a really bright future. She's still really young. She's very, very good. Predominantly a grappler, but her wrestling is coming into play, is developing, her striking's developing as well, and she's developing into a fighter that's just really difficult to beat and really difficult to game plan against, because where do you go with Casey O'Neill? Do you take her down? Well, she's got good jiu-jitsu, she'll probably be able to sweep you, reverse you, or catch a submission off her back. But then do you strike with Casey O'Neill, or who's improving her striking, closing the distance, being aggressive, because she knows that if she is aggressive and gets in the face of her opponent, then it's going to give her opportunities to close the distance, get a hold of her opponents and take them down. She's a really difficult fighter to game plan against. For Roxanne Modafferi, who is at the end of her career, she surely doesn't have too many fights left. You know, she's had a great career. She's been a fun fighter, and You know, she's won as a big underdog on numerous occasions, but I just don't think this is one of them. I think Roxanne Modafferi is susceptible to being taken down. She's been taken down plenty of times in the last few fights, and that is a major concern in this fight, because normally Roxanne Modafferi can be the better grappler than her opponent, so she can get out of those sticky spots when she is taken down. But I think Casey O'Neill is legit on the mat. If she does take Roxanne Modafferi down, I don't think Modafferi is going to be able to find submissions off her back. I don't think she's going to be able to hit a sweep or reversal. I think Casey O'Neill will just dominate from those top positions. I'm picking Casey O'Neill to win this fight. So in the next fight, we've got Alex Perez versus Matt Schnell. A really interesting fight, because this is the 4th time that this fight's been booked. The UFC have been booking this fight since May of last year, which is a bit crazy when you think about it, because I do genuinely think it's going to be a relatively one-sided fight. I think Alex Perez is the better striker, he's the better wrestler, he's the better grappler. I think he's got more power, he's got more submission ability, his cardio's fine as well. He's fought a better level and beaten a better level of competition than Matt Schnell and what Matt Schnell is. So it's really intriguing to why the UFC keep booking this fight, because it's not as if it's a fight where the winner's going to get a title shot and therefore both fighters are happy to wait and fight each other to try and get that title shot. It's not like that at all. So very strange fight, but like I said, I think Alex Perez has got every box checked here. Obviously, Matt Schnell's not a bad fighter and he could potentially catch him with something, but it's difficult to see Alex Perez losing this fight. I do think that, like I've already mentioned, Perez is the better striker, wrestler, grappler, fine cardio, and he's got good finishing ability as well if he doesn't win a decision. So I'm picking Alex Perez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got William Knight versus Maxin Grishin. Two fighters that I think they've both got a lot of holes in the game. They've both got red flags. Maxin Grishin, I think he came to the UFC with a little bit of hype. The dude's super experienced, really big record. He's fought for many, many years. So I think there was a lot of, well, not a lot, but quite a bit of hype around him, quite a bit of excitement. But I just think Maxin Grishin hasn't looked that exciting in the UFC. He's not been able to find the brutal knockouts. He's not really been able to implement game plans enough in the UFC for me, and I just feel that he's been dominant outside of the UFC, but then he's come into the big leagues, into the under the brightest lights, and he's just hit a level of competition that he's genuinely not going to be able to run through like he has done in previous fights. And as for William Knight, an exciting fighter, absolutely huge. He's a unit to look at. Not sure how he makes the weight, but he's a beast. The problem with William Knight, though, is he can be a little bit inactive, and I think it's a loss of faith in his cardio and his gas tank. He can look tired the longer that fight goes on. So, like I said, that's a real concern from William Knight's perspective. I do think when you look at this fight, it's going to be one of those fights that is going to be a relatively slow paced. I think Grishin's going to be a bit tentative because he doesn't want to get knocked out by the power of Knight. And I actually think that plays into the game plan of Knight, who probably isn't going to want to put out a ton of volume because of the cardio issues. So when you look at the fight from that perspective, if it is a slow paced fight with Grishin tentative, that's going to make William Knight happy because he's going to be able to pick his shots. He's not going to be forced to fight a high volumed fight that is going to tire out in. I don't think Grishin is going to score takedowns against William Knight that we've seen. Again, that's a hole in William Knight's game. We've seen him taken down and controlled for 3 rounds, but that's not really Griffin's style either. So from a stylistic perspective, I think the fight favours William Knight, and I'm picking William Knight to win this fight. Then the next fight, we've got Ronnie Lawrence versus Mana Martinez. Ronnie Lawrence is one of my favourite prospects in the UFC. I think he's an exciting fighter, and he's, again, like I said with Casey O'Neill, I think Ronnie Lawrence is just going to be a really difficult fighter to beat. He's got a bit of a karate kickboxing style on the feet. He can switch stances really well. He's not afraid to get into the pocket and exchange punches either inside boxing range, although he doesn't have massive power. Like I said, he's just not afraid to get into those positions, and wherever the fight is on the feet, I feel like he's comfortable and he can control it. But one of the main reasons why he can control fights on the feet is because of his relentless wrestling game. If you overcommit against a guy like Ronnie Lawrence, he's going to be able to take you down. He'll land 8, 9, 10 plus takedowns if he needs to. He can struggle a little bit with top control time, hence why he does need a high volume wrestling game, but ultimately he does have submissions in his locker and he is a good top side grappler. He can transition from position to position, and if his opponent does start to get back up, rather than fighting it, Ronnie Lawrence will allow him back up just to take him back down again. Now, with Mana Martinez, I think that Ronnie Lawrence has definitely got his number from a wrestling perspective. I think that once Martinez is on his back, Ronnie Lawrence will be able to do good work on top. Where Ronnie Lawrence has got to be careful is Mana Martinez. We haven't seen it in the UFC yet, but if you look at his fights outside of the UFC, he's got that death touch in his hands. He can just land that one punch that doesn't look like has got much behind it. Obviously, these guys aren't heavyweights either. So when he does touch his opponents, they can just fall to sleep, unconscious. So Ronnie Lawrence has got to be careful that he doesn't get cracked by that death touch. With that being said though, Mana Martinez landed enough on Guido Canetti and didn't knock him out. So I feel that Ronnie Lawrence should be okay. Lawrence should be able to implement his game plan in this fight, get the takedowns he needs, potentially sub Martinez. But if he doesn't sub Mana Martinez, then winning 2 out of 3 rounds is definitely not out of the question at all. He'd probably win 3 out of the 3 rounds. I'm picking Ronnie Lawrence to win this fight. And in the next fight, I'm not sure why this fight is so far down the card. Maybe they changed the order of the fight card and, you know, it gets bumped up, but we've got Alexander Hernandez versus Renato Moicano. And again, from a stylistic perspective, it's an interesting fight. Alexander Hernandez has got that short, stocky, explosive style where he will come forwards and he will land hard punches. Obviously, Moicano has suffered a few knockouts in the UFC. There's definitely that chance that Hernandez comes forward, gets into that boxing range and lands a hard right hand to knock Moicano out. But outside of that, I think that Hernandez is going to struggle in this fight. I think if Moicano can get his range, his movement up to scratch in this fight and he stays on point with that and doesn't get into these crazy wild exchanges inside boxing range, I think Moicano can kick Hernandez from the outside, really start damaging the legs. I think he can pop a jab out there, straight punches, again from the outside. And then when Hernandez does close the distance, or if Moicano wants to close the distance, I think if he comes all the way in, gets a hold of Hernandez, he can use body lock, trip takedowns to get Hernandez down. Hernandez is a decent wrestler, so Moicano, I think, would be wasting his energy trying to look for single legs and double legs. I do think that Moicano should use the same takedowns as he used against Jai Herbert. Like I said, the double underhooks, the body lock, tripping him down to the mat. And if this does hit the mat, I think that Moicano is by far the better grappler here, better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter for sure. I think he'll be able to roll on Hernandez on the mat. I think he'll be able to get in some good positions, land some good ground and pound, and potentially submit Hernandez as well. Like I said, from Hernandez's perspective, I think that he's just got to land a punch inside boxing range, a punch that I'm not quite sure happens very often. If these guys were to fight 10 times, I think Hernandez, if he went to his wrestling, I think he'd be making a mistake, because if he hits the mat with Moicano, as I've already mentioned, is the better grappler. He's got good submissions. Hitting a sweep or reversal in a scramble wouldn't surprise me. That gets him on top of Hernandez. That's why I think it'd be a mistake. Hernandez trying to wrestle Moicano here. I just feel that Moicano can win in multiple ways, whereas Hernandez, he's got to win in a certain way. For that reason, I'm picking Renato Moicano to win this fight. Then in the next fight, we've got Carlos Ulberg versus Fabio Cherant. Both fighters, again, real holes in the game. I've got problems with both of them from a stylistic perspective, but it is a good fight that they've matched them together, because Carlos Ulberg trains with Israel Adesanya. Adesanya speaks highly of Ulberg, and in his UFC debut against Kennedy and Nzechukwu, Ulberg started solid, landing hard combinations, hard punches, hard kicks, had Nzechukwu hurt, and then his gas tank just absolutely fell off a cliff, allowed Nzechukwu to come back into the fight, and he got beat. Real red flag there. On the other side with Fabio Cherant is a big guy. You see the power in his hands, but he has a real lack of volume and he struggles to engage, and he starts slow and doesn't really pick that speed up throughout the fight either. And he's got a decent submission game. That's actually where his best work is done, on the mat, choking his opponents out. But the thing is, his wrestling isn't that amazing either at this level in the UFC I'm talking about. So to actually get fighters down to the mat is going to be really difficult at this level in the UFC, and therefore his submission game can't come into play as much. That's going to be a problem for him. So both fights, I'm really struggling to figure out who's going to get the better of their opponent. Is it going to be Ulberg that starts fast again, hurts Cherant, can't get him out of there, then Cherant takes him down and submits him? Or is Ulberg just going to start fast and get him out of there? Really, I think that's probably the more likely outcome out of the two. I do think that Ulberg has to get Cherant out early if he overexerts himself like he does last time. The other side to this is, if Ulberg's learnt from his mistakes and he doesn't come out as fast and hard and doesn't have that adrenaline dump and just sticks to a point fighting style where he just constantly applies nice amounts of volume throughout the round with some hard, crisp shots along the way. I think that Fabio Cherant's in a world of trouble in that game plan. So I think that Ulberg could take him out early if he comes out wild, but if he doesn't, then Ulberg should be able to win a decision as long as his takedown defense holds up, which I think it will against Cherant. I'm picking Carlos Ulberg to win this fight. Then in the next fight, we've got Jacob Malkoun versus AJ Dobson. AJ Dobson, ton of first round finishers, comes out like a bull, throws hard shots, doesn't mind eating some hard shots back at him either. Absolutely comfortable in those crazy, powerful boxing exchanges. And that's what makes him really dangerous. If this fight gets extended, honestly, there's just been not a lot of tape showing AJ Dobson going 3 hard rounds with his opponents, working him, trying to test that gas tank and that cardio. So it's a bit of an unknown. And Malkoun could adopt a similar sort of game plan as he did against Abdul Razak Al Hassan, where he just takes him down and controls each round. Again, we haven't seen too much of the takedown defense of Dobson because he's normally in his opponent's face, smashing them and knocking them out. So there's a lot of unknowns in this fight. It's really difficult to tell where it's going to go from a pick perspective. I've got to pick AJ Dobson. I think that if he comes out aggressively, explosively, like he does in every single one of his fights, he is going to find a first round knockout against Jacob Malkoun. That will stop at some point though. The better level of competition that AJ Dobson fights, at some point he's not going to be able to knock his opponent out like that. But right now against Jacob Malkoun, he should be able to catch him early before Malkoun can then get any sort of wrestling and topside grappling game going. So I'm picking AJ Dobson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Sergey Morozov. This is a really, really good fight. The fact that it's the second fight on the card is just crazy. I think Sergey Morozov, seriously well-rounded, a good striker. He's calm, he's composed in exchanges, heavy exchanges. You does have to be careful in this fight though, because if you go in heavy exchange for exchange with somebody like Douglas Silva de Andrade, then you're going to risk getting knocked out. De Andrade is a seriously heavy hitter, explosive and powerful himself. So Morozov does have to be careful. But from a striking perspective, outside of the power, Morozov is the better striker, the better technical striker, will mix things up better. And he's also got a decent wrestling game. Topside grappling could be worked on a little bit, but what Morozov does really well is he hangs on the back of his opponent with that body lock really, really well. And I almost think that he's got one of those grips that's really difficult to break because he just doesn't let go of his opponents, and his opponents can't seem to break that grip. So with Morozov, I think the plan here, get inside the cage, don't get in too many wild exchanges, get a hold of Douglas Silva de Andrade, take him down, try and wear on the gas tank of de Andrade, although he has shown a decent gas tank for his physique, which is absolutely huge for the division. He's a bit of a unit. I do think de Andrade will be able to get back up to his feet every now and again, but ultimately I think that Morozov, the longer this fight goes on, the better he will look, the more his game plan will be implemented. And I think maybe a late finish, or even if the fight goes to a decision, I think Morozov can win at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. He's just got to be careful that he doesn't fall into that trap of Douglas Silva de Andrade, of those explosive exchanges inside boxing range. I think Sergey Morozov is the better fighter overall, the more likely fighter to implement the game plan throughout the fight. I'm picking Sergey Morozov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jeremiah Wells versus Blood Diamond. Awesome nickname, and we welcome Blood Diamond into the UFC. Jeremiah Wells is a decent favourite in this fight, and it's not too difficult to see why. Blood Diamond, he looks like he's got pretty stiff and robotic striking. Definitely room for development, and he will develop and improve. You can see he's just a little bit green in that aspect. He has looked like he's got decent scrambles. It looks like his transitioning is really good as well. In one of his fights, he transitioned to the back of his opponent and submitted them. But then that's the other problem that I've got with Blood Diamond. There's just not a lot of footage out there to have a real solid read on him. Like I said, from what I've seen, his striking's a little stiff and robotic, very green. His grappling can be decent, but at this level in the UFC, is that going to hold up? I'm not too sure. Jeremiah Wells is a fighter that's going to have explosive striking. He's got decent wrestling. He's got decent grappling. I don't think he's a world-class fighter yet in the UFC, but I think it's going to be enough to be able to definitely halt anything that Blood Diamond's going to present to him. I think if Blood Diamonds improve drastically, which I've said this before, I've broken fighters down before where they've not looked that great outside the UFC and then they've come in and looked like a completely different fighter. So now that's always a possibility. But look, from a pick perspective, I think that Jeremiah Wells is a rightful favourite in this fight. Whether he knocks him out or whether this goes late, I think that Jeremiah Wells has got that UFC experience. I think he's got enough experience over Blood Diamond, so I'm picking Jeremiah Wells to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the On the Moneyline podcast by MMA Play 365. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the breakdowns. As always, I really appreciate the support. If you could give the video a like, if you could subscribe to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365, I would be really grateful. And once again, just to remind you, check out Baze AI, our brand new UFC fight prediction software, which is on our website at MMAplay365.com. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.